Hey everyone, thanks for joining me today. My name is Jordan Nelson. I'm representing Nasco here today. We're going to be doing some fun at-home math projects, different activities that you can be doing. This is focusing just on elementary. As you see, I have a bunch of different supplies on my table here. We're going to be focusing on something called Smart Starts. This is some different activities that we have that NASCO provides. And so this is essentially supposed to be for at-home use. So you have essentially a teacher or parent guide, and then you also have a complimentary student guide where it has all the different activity sheets that you can reproduce and or use throughout all the different objects. So what we're going to start off with first, before running into everything here, we're going to be showing you a short video. Actually, not so short, actually. It's actually about a 20 to 25-minute video. We're going to run through all the different activities that we're going to be doing today. Now, the activities are going to start from pre-K, K to 1, and then they're going to jump to 2 to 3, then 3 to 4, and 4 to 5. And they're progressively go through that. So if you don't, if you miss something, or if you are say, oh, I went too fast on something, don't worry. Right after the video, we're going to reconvene and we're going to go over things more in detail. And then that too, throughout the whole process, if you have any questions, we'll answer them then, and then go over those in more specific. So again, we're going to run the video real quick, and then again, if you have any questions, make sure to mention in that question mark, and we'll go from there. Today, we're going to be doing some fun math activities for elementary. We're going to be using a variety of different supplies, as you see here, but the main thing we're going to be focusing on are dice. Now, what's nice about dice is that they come in many different sizes, shapes, materials. Sometimes I've seen plastic, wood, metal, foam, and the best thing is too is that if you don't have any at home, oftentimes you can create your own. Whether if you're using a wood block, you could put paper on there or paint, your marker or something to that nature. You can make it out of paper. Sometimes you can find dice in games that you have, so you might already have them without even knowing it. But they're easily accessible, and we're going to have a lot of fun with them. So when you're working with younger students, the main thing you want to focus on with dice is talking about the dots, right? And what do the dots mean? All of these dots mean a number. And there's many different sides, so you want to make sure to count all the different sides. Oftentimes you have students write that down. It's a little bit easier for them. So then they can also write numbers. So you can write the numbers, you can talk about the sides, the dots, and then you can get into some other different games with them after they start learning some different numbers. So that's what you really want to do with the early learning students first. And then what we're going to work on first is our first activity for the students. After you get acclimated with the dice, is you're going to be working on a worksheet that looks similar to this. All right, so the activity here is where you have the number I rolled, the dots that are on that roll, and then you're going to write how many, or circle how many, the number of that that is equivalent to that. So here they have bears. You can use a variety of different supplies here, right? So if you want to use foam pieces, different colors. If you don't have foam, you can cut out cardboard, you can mark on them. So let's practice some of these rolls with you. So just to kind of give you an idea, so you're going to take one die, you're going to roll it. I rolled a 6 in this case, so I'm going to write my number 6, and then I'm going to mark the dots that I see on my dice. I see 6, and then I'm going to circle how many bears or items that you have at home that I would have that equals that number. So in this case, I rolled a 6. I wrote down on the dice, or in the dots column, the number 6, and then I also
I
circled
have
6 bears. So it's a nice little easy
um,
activity that you can roll with, and
because
again,
they
you want to
wanted
begin with
to
one dice. All right, and then they have a couple of
um,
different questions right here. If you're going to do this activity at home, you don't need this worksheet necessarily. You can use a blank piece of paper and recreate it. You can also take a still screenshot of this and then recreate it that way. So anytime you can pause this video, feel free to. But that's essentially the first activity that they're going to be doing. And then down here, they're going to talk about what is the numbers that I rolled the most, the numbers I rolled the least. Sometimes you can make guesses about that prior to. doing this activity is a good fun way to introduce probability if you're going to get into that. Otherwise, you can start with the very basics at first. So this is the first activity that they're going to be doing. An extending activity from there is, as you might have guessed, now they're going to use 2 dice. So instead of using the first dice of getting basic 1-digit numbers, now they're getting 2-digit numbers, and it's going to become a little bit more challenging for students to actually start thinking about. So I'll do an example here. I'll roll my dice. I rolled a 2 and a 1. So the number I rolled was a 3. The dots that I have on there, I'm going to write individually. And then I'm going to circle how many bears or items that you would have at home. So again, I rolled a 2 and a 1. So I rolled the 3 total. I rolled individuals, a 2 and a 1, and then I circled the 3 bears. All right, so that's the extension of this activity. So you first start off with 1 dice, you extend to 2 dice, and then if you want to, you can certainly extend to 3 dice. The other activity that we're going to be doing is about counting the, in this case, bears, but again, you can use foam pieces, or we have county bears, 2 different colors, and they're basically going to be counting individually, right? So what happens here is it's easier for students to count if it's in a line versus necessarily in a group. So I would challenge students, if they're first working on this activity here, I would grab a variety of different bears that you would have here, and I would start lining them up for them to count. So in this case, I have 5 bears, and the students would see that, and they would count up to 5. If you want to add more difficulty to this, you can associate the colors. So how many green bears do I have? How many yellow bears do I have? But then you're also testing whether or not they know their colors. So that's another activity that you can use with this. But then after that, after going in lines, I would have them in groups, and I have them say, okay, how many bears do we have? And then that would force them to either count individually or count as in a group. So it's a little bit different challenges, a different activity, but again, a varying difficulty for them. One of the nice things too is if you're rolling multiple dice, you can have multiple colors. So if you have a red and a blue and a white, you know that my first die is white, my second dice is always green, and my third dice is always red. This can also help students to keep track of the numbers of dice that they're actually rolling to. In this case, back to this activity, if you have the number of bears, you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and by 3, you know you have 21. But this allows them to start counting up to 40. Now you can increase that number, you can decrease that depending on the level of the students, but this is a nice little activity that you can extend beyond that. The next activity that we're going to be doing is you roll the dice, but they have this word problem off to the right here. So usually when we're trying to do word problems like this, we start to stay with 1-digit numbers. As you can extend, you can get into 2 digits and add the amount of dice. So for example, if I had the problem 4 plus 5 equals 9, I know that with 1 dice, I can't get beyond 9. So what I would do is I would roll my 1 dice here, and I rolled a 6. Okay, so I rolled a 6 here, so I put in my 1 column the roll that I had. The dots, now you can either have them write the dice again, or what you can do is you can actually have how many dots they have, and you can have them fill it in. There's multiple ways you can do this. It just kind of depends on the skill level of your students. So I rolled a 6, so I can do, again, the dots right down here, or I can do the dice, and then it says how many more do I need to equal the 9. All right, so then I would take the 6 or the 9 minus the 6, and then I would determine that I would need 3 more. So that's what I would write in this column. And you can do this again for various levels. If you want to start with addition, you can go to subtraction, you can go to multiplication, division. There's a lot of different ways to expand or make this more difficult. But this is a nice, easy activity with dice that you can do to explain, to use with students. And then the last activity for that is counting bears. So how many more teddy bears do I need to make a certain number? So in this case, I'm using bears again. It's very common. 2 bears, how many more do I need to make 10? All right, so now you're going to count, say I have 2. To make 10, I need 8 more. They can use this line or worksheet to add more if they want to draw or design a little bit more and they want to circle that. That kind of helps them. So, for example, if I had stars and I wanted to make okay? So if I had stars here, if you wanted to draw it out, so I have 2 to make 10, so 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So how many do I have there? And you can have them circle this and circle this number so they know they have 2 and they need 8 more to equal 10. It kind of helps them write it down and it helps them with the instruction as well. So again, you can various the levels of addition, subtraction, multiplication, addition, just nice, easy, simple activities that you can do with your students. So that's the very first phase. The second phase is getting into a little bit more challenging activities for addition. Now we're getting into 2-digit numbers. So this is again something you can create at home. You can still frame the image and work with this. So instead of using 1 dice, we're just using 2. So I'm going to use 2 different colors. So white is going to be my first and green is going to be my second. So I have 6 on the first white die. And my green die, which is my second, is 2. I write down my numbers and my total number is 8. So again, white is the first, second. If you want to, they can actually write down the colors too, so they know exactly which color die is too. So if they know the white is the first one, the green is the second, they can write it on each one, or they can write the little note at the top so they know and remember. And they can do various problems here. Again, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Division is going to be a little bit more tricky if you're going to get into like maybe fractions or decimals. But again, this is something that students can work on, and you can various the levels. You can go from 2 die, and then you can extend that into 3 dice. So give them practice answers, so you can have them blank where they do their own, or you can actually write some out for them. That's a great way to extend this activity. And then you can get into word problems, because the biggest thing is too with math is all about literacy. So when we say the words like add or take away, what are we actually trying to mean? That's very important here. So we have some word problems here that can work with students where it works with 3 different numbers. What you can do with students to lead into this is using, again, the 3 dice, and then talking about that same application of saying, okay, you have 3 different items here, how many do you have total? It's a great way to start getting students to work with word problems, math literacy, and then also working with formulas and thinking about those kinds of aspects. So the last activity that we have with working with dice is fill in correct numbers. So this is 1 more, 1 less. Now what's different about this activity is that 1 dice is going to represent 1 number, and the second dice is going to represent your second. So I again use colored dice, and I'll show you an example of how we actually play this game. So my first dice, white, is 1, and I'm going to write that in there. And then my second dice is 6. And typically with this, you can do, you can write 2 different versions of this. So in the first section, you can see that I wrote a 7. The second one shows that I have a different number. So the first one is you roll a dice and you have them together and you add it to equal a certain number. Or the second way to do this is you have the first die is your 10 spot, and your second die is your 100 or your 1s, and then your 10 spot. So then if you think about a number that's 1 less than 7, it would be 6. If it's 1 more than 7, it would be 8. All right, and then you write your number down here. Now 17, it would be here, you would write it down here. 1 less would be 16, 1 more would be 18, okay? And you can do this again for adding or subtraction, division, etc. There's a lot of different ways that you can use 1 more, 1 less version. But again, this is a nice little activity that you can use extending with dice. The next activity we're going to move into is using our hundreds board. So a 100 board is a very easy way to keep track of 100 different, now you can use graph paper to do this, you can recreate it at your own. There's blanks that you can have here. If you have this readily available, that's nice. But essentially it's going to be called a race to 20. And what we're going to use is pennies and nickels. All right, so for example, each player is going to need one dice. So, you know, one green, one white. So just an example, I'll roll both for you. So say player one has pennies, they have a 1. So what they're going to do is they're going to take 1 penny and they're going to put it on 1. The second player has 5, and since they have nickels, what they're going to be doing is they're going to add 5 nickels to the board. Okay, now my board's a little bit smaller, but that's okay. You can make them a little bit bigger depending on what you use. Now, if you wanted to use foam chips or something a little bit bigger or smaller, you can certainly do that. But the idea is the first person to get to exactly 20 wins the game. So say we kept filling up our boards and we kept rolling. So say we got 5 more for the white. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We got 1 for the nickel. We'll keep going. White gets 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now notice second player got a 5. There's only 3 spots left. So in that case, they would not be able to complete the game and win. So it's, again, the first person to get exactly 20. So they would get 5, again, only 3 spots, 4, so you can't keep going, so you keep rolling, taking turns. 3, so since this would have been rolled first, 3, and then pennies, or the first player, would win the game. Now you can increase the numbers here, you can increase the numbers depending on the difficulty if you want to go to 50, but again, this is one way to do the game. The extension to this game would be then after they're all done, depending if you're using pennies and nickels, you can start counting the change or exactly how much they have. So in this case, you can group them easily into 5s and say that I have 11 cents. Well, player 2 has 5, 6, 30 cents. So again, this is just little games that you can do and extend. But again, this is a nice fun game called Race to 20 that students can actually play together with multiple people, with parents, etc. at home. A lot of easy activities. The second one that you can do is working with students with a spinner. Or in this case, so oftentimes right here we have these spinners that have color on them. It's a little bit, it might be easier to see down there, but essentially you can write whatever numbers you want on there. So if I wanted to write a 4, a 5, a 1, and a 2, I would write down, oh, I got a 2, so I write, my number that I spun was 2, and then my number rolled, which was here, is a 2, so I'd write 2, 2, and my answer total is 4. Now, if you don't have a spinner, you can just use 2 numbers, right? Or you can use 3 numbers, depending on what you have. So even though it says my number spun, if you don't have a spinner, you can use just dice here. But essentially what you're trying to do is getting students familiar with 2-digit and 1-digit numbers without carrying. So we're not talking about carrying, and what I mean carry is when you have to add numbers to the 10 spot. Okay, so 36 plus 3, you know, is 39. We're not going to 40 at any given time. So there's 2-digit and 1-digit numbers without borrowing, and then we added the feature of greater than, less than, or equal to. So you can work with your parents, you can work with your students at home, or a sibling, etc. Nice little activity that you can extend. We do have, this is spinners that we actually have that you can actually recreate. So if you wanted to create something like this and create your own spinner, you certainly could. That's a viable option. And then when we get into the last activities, we're going to start getting a little more challenging into time. All right, so analog and digital. So a lot of students are really easy have a little bit of trouble with this only because they're so used to seeing everything digital that actually reading an analog clock, oftentimes what you see at school, it can be a little bit more challenging. So this, you might need to assist with your students a little bit more in depth when you first use this. But essentially what we're going to be doing is using 2 dice, and each dice is going to, so you can only get numbers 2 to 12, and every number is going to equate to a certain minute, okay? So, in this example, so if you roll a 2, it's going to equal 10 minutes. If you roll a 3, it's going to be 15 minutes. 4, it's going to be 20, and it's going to keep extending to 5 minutes. And if you roll a 12, it's an hour. Okay, so the first one you're going to do is you're going to roll the dice. So I have a 10. So my number is actually 50. So my first number would be 50. And then you're going to roll a separate dice, individual, actually no, you're going to roll 2 dice again for your hour. So then you would have a 6. So my time is 6:50. And then the students would actually draw their little hand past the 6, and then they draw their big hand towards the 50 mark. So again, they're doing the analog and the digital on there. It's a great way for students to be able to work and tell time. This is, again, a little bit easier part of it because they're just adding up. The next part, extension to this, is talking about elapsed time. So what I've done is actually written down a couple of different examples that we have here from some students. So I would have a start time for all digital. If you want to mix it up, you can do analog next, but digital is typically the little bit easier to begin with. And then if you want to make sure you have AM and PM on there. It's a little bit harder for them, so first I would just start with the individual numbers and not go past a certain time. Just assume that, you know, if it's 1 to 9, that it could be AM or PM. So just easy numbers at first, and then you get into more of the analog. Again, easy way, but work with your students on that. That's going to be a little bit more challenging. The next activity that we're going to be doing is making change. So this is a fun little activity here. So you have different supplied goods. In this case, I have plastic pieces here. So I have oranges, bananas, and apples, and each one has associated costs with it. So for example, if I were to start with like $1, or if they have $2, depending on what you want to start with, you can grab X amount of supplies and say, all right, in my group here, I have 2 oranges, each 19 cents. I have 1 apple, that's 54 cents, and I have 1 banana, that's 17 cents. If I have $2, what is my change? All right, so then you would have to calculate, and you can use manipulatives like this, like pennies, nickels, quarters. You can actually use real change if you want to. That kind of helps them start thinking. But this has a real world application to it, right? So just going to the grocery store, thinking of that, be mindful. Now, don't worry about tax at this time. If you want to, you can add that element. But this is a great way to start working with students on thinking about real world applications. Then the next thing, extension after that, is counting change. So if you're working with students, it's one thing to make change, but you also want to count change too. So you also have, say for example, if you have X amount of pennies in here, and you have a couple nickels, and then you have 1 dime. How much change do I actually have? Then where this case, this is also a good activity because now you can start introducing some other coins maybe they're not familiar with. So one of those is the $50. This coin right here is a little bit bigger. It's often special ordered, or you have to ask for specifically. Same thing with the $1 coin. Oftentimes too, they'll keep this a little bit different color just because it stands out a little bit easier. So then, like if you're handing a person change or certain at the store, they kind of keep track of it. But these are good ways to introduce other coins as well. And then again, counting the change up, writing it out exactly how you want it. That's a great way to extend that activity. So again, making change, counting change, good activities that you can use with plastic and or real change. And then the who has more. Okay, so this is the last activity that we're going to be doing. You can use multiple players or if the same person, the first roll versus, or your first set of rolls versus your second set of rolls, you can do it individually. So essentially how you play this game is you have two different dice, actually sorry, three different dice. And so each dice represents a certain different value, right? So the white dice is going to, for this case, be my pennies. The green dice is going to be my dimes, and then my red piece is going to be my quarters. So what you would do is you would write this down, make sure you know which is which. So my pennies would be 4. And then I would have, for my green dice, I had dimes. So then I had 5 dimes. And then for my red piece, I had 5 quarters. So I would actually add up all of these different change, and player 1 would say, I have, I rolled, so I have pennies, I can write dimes, I have 5, and I have quarters. And then how much do I have? All right, and then the player 2 would go, and then they would say, who has more? So again, this is a nice, easy way. You can write it down here, or you can have it as a picture. It kind of depends on what you want to do. So these are great activities. I hope you learned some more, and thank you for watching.